our unconscious is becoming more and more primitive. And so if you look at the way people interact with one another, rather than having this very sophisticated play of emotions and humor and irony and fun, largely what you see is rage. We've become a rage culture. And so I think that because we have devalued that aspect of it, it's become primitive and we've lost our sophistication and the value in those aspects of humanity.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of Through Conversations podcast, where I'm joined by Dr. Daniel Lieberman. Daniel Lieberman is Senior Vice President of Mental Health, Hims and Hers Health. He's also a clinical professor of psychiatry, George Washington University, and he's the author of the new book, Spellbound, and the book, The Molecule of More. So, Daniel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm honored to have you here, because the world is a bit of on a whirlwind. We'll discover it in this conversation, the mental health side of it all, and also the mystical, the magical realm of it all, and also trying to connect these two dots. But before we start, I'd like to know, Daniel, who is Carl Jung for you?
Carl Jung is someone that I've been interested in almost my whole life. I ran into him after graduating from college. I happened to be living in Japan at the time, sort of casting about for direction in life, not sure where I wanted to go. I read his books. It was like a revelation to me. It opened up worlds I had never considered before. And it was then that I decided that I wanted to become a psychiatrist.
Wow. And how did his ideas influence your worldview? Because I'm a very fond fanatic of Carl Jung's ideas. And, you know, your book, Spellbound, really allowed me to refresh my ideas on him and also put it in the modern world and also my daily life. So how did it influence? What was one of the biggest ideas for you that really impacted your worldview?
So, you know, the most important thing about Carl Jung's work is the discussion of the unconscious mind. These are the activities going on in our brain that we are largely unaware of and have absolutely no control over. And so some examples of this might be moods. What our mood is has a profound influence over how we function and the people around us, and yet we have absolutely no control over it. Another thing I like to bring up is desire. We structure our life based around getting the things we want, whether it's a sandwich or a career, short-term or long-term. But we don't control what these desires are. And it's not unusual for people to say, oh my gosh, I wish I didn't have this desire. I'm completely obsessed with this person. I know that she's horrible for me, but I can't get her out of my head. I wish I could stop eating so many donuts. There's so much in our life that we don't have control over. And yet we spend very little time thinking about how can we work with these aspects of the brain? How can we make them allies so that things like inspiration, energy, enthusiasm, excitement act as tailwinds that push us along through life? And Carl Jung addressed that very important question, and I thought he came up with some fascinating ideas.
Yes, and we'll discover those, we'll explore those during this conversation, absolutely. I really enjoy how you write on Spellbound, how, you know, personally, because I think this is a very good segue into speaking about Spellbound, is that in the modern reality that we're facing sort of a drainage of awe, of inspiration, of magic in life. We're facing this, I think it's an inflection point, or whether it's a tug of war between thinking that life is material only, life is only about acquiring more, getting more wealth, or, you know, acquiring material things. And also scientifically speaking, we're all driven by materialism. But your book comes at a very timely time because we're creating AI. We're trying to push the boundaries of what can be accomplished in terms of human nature. And the logical conclusion for most of us would be we have to double down on materialism, right? But you offer this counterpoint, which is magic could be the answer of it all. The mystical experience could be the answer of it all. The Jungian explanation of the mind could unlock our potential. And so how do you see, this inflection point in which we're trying to overcome those limits of our potential, but with doing so through the mystical realm?
Yeah, so I think that you're right, that we do tend to be materialistically focused in our culture. Social media influencers are constantly talking about the latest products to buy, clothes, makeup, handbags, cars. You're really judged in many circles by what it is that you have. Mm-hmm. But if you think about what are the peak experiences that you've had in life, it's very unlikely it involves any kind of a purchase. Peak experiences, I think, can be described as when we feel most alive. Sometimes we call these magic moments, and they can happen when you're alone. All of a sudden, the world is transformed, and you feel very, very wide awake, and you feel this sense of excitement and maybe even longing. It can happen with other people, where there's this kind of magic moment of intimacy that pulls you out of the daily, ordinary aspects of life and make you feel like you've pierced a veil and you're seeing something more real than ordinary reality. This is the feeling of being filled with life. And according to Jung's ideas, what this represents is a connection to the unconscious mind. Usually, the conscious part of the mind that we're aware of and the unconscious mind are separated by this wall. Mm-hmm. But it's a porous wall to some degree. And once in a while, during these magic moments, when we feel most alive, we pierce that wall and we come in contact with the hidden aspects of our lives, the unconscious mind. And we talk a lot about it in terms of magic. We talk about a magic moment. We talk about a mystical experience. And the reason is that the thought processes of the unconscious are very, very different than the conscious mind. When we connect with them, they feel very alien, but they also feel potent and powerful. And so psychology hasn't been around for that long, only for a few hundred years. But of course, humanity has been fascinated with its own psyche for millennia, really for all of recorded human history. And what one of Jung's insight is that the ancient stories about magic and the supernatural is actually a very sophisticated psychology. When they were writing about these nature gods and these sky gods and earth gods and water gods, they weren't really writing about the natural world. They were actually telling stories about our unconscious mind. And by reading these stories, we can find a roadmap to growth.
Absolutely. And I think that what you write brilliantly on and you describe right now, I also write on Spellbound, is that the unconscious mind, I think we all know what it is on a verbal way. I can speak with you about the unconscious mind, but at the same time, we don't really understand what it is. And so for our listeners, you argue that the unconscious mind drives all of our decisions, just like we discussed now. And so what is the unconscious mind? How do we tap into it? And also, what are some of those layers that you've used to unlock its potential, but at the same time put a halt into it? Because I know there's this dance with the shadow, and it's also influenced with the unconscious mind and how, we see these eruptions of irrational behavior, quote unquote. So what is the unconscious mind? And if you can go from there, Daniel.
Sure. So let's start out by defining mind. The way doctors and neuroscientists think about the mind is activity of cells in the brain. That's a somewhat reductionistic, materialistic definition, but it's the most fruitful. I think that that we tend to think about the mind as being perhaps something that is insubstantial, immaterial, perhaps spiritual. And that may or may not be true, but it's something science can't address. Science can only address things that are material. So we'll talk about the mind as activity of the brain. There are billions of cells in the brain, lots of different circuits going on. Some of the activity we're aware of, and that's the conscious mind. but the vast majority we're unaware of. And let me give you a very simple example. There are parts of your brain that are responsible for controlling your heart rate and your blood pressure. You don't have any control over that. You can't say, let's take my heart rate up another 10 beats per minute. You can't do that. Same with your blood pressure. And it sounds very primitive, but it's actually unbelievably sophisticated in terms of information processing. Another primitive thing the unconscious mind does is it controls muscle coordination. So if I want to raise my arm, it seems like the simplest thing in the world, but actually it requires control of millions of individual muscle fibers in order to get those joint angles exactly right. So it's extremely sophisticated. Now, as we sort of go up to more and more sophistication, we get things like moods, emotions, desires. We go up higher and we get behaviors that we might label instinct. Now, a lot of people, when they hear the word instinct, they think of something primitive, the sexual drive, the hunger drive, the aggression drive. And that's true, but instinct can also be extremely sophisticated. We get a sense of this by looking at the instincts of animals. If you look at ants, many people have heard of leafcutter ants. Leafcutter ants are farmers and ranchers. They cut these leaves, but they're not eating the leaves. They're growing a fungus on the leaves that they then eat. They're ranchers. They have aphids that produce a sugary liquid that they can eat, and they feed the aphids and they protect its young. This is not learned from generation to generation. This is coded in the DNA as instinct. So if leafcutter ants, with their microscopic brains, are able to have that level of sophistication in their instinct, imagine what humans can have. And human instinct is so sophisticated and so powerful that the conscious mind is unable to take it all in. We can only take in little tiny parts of it. And what Jung called these very sophisticated instincts were archetypes.
Yes, we'll 100% discuss about archetypes and also discuss a bit about dreams, because that's one of my favorite topics in terms of, Jungian psychology. But I'm very interested because, I was born in a world, like you say right now, it's science is driven by materialism, and I try to hint into it in my previous question, but when I go in, you write this too in Spellbound, when I go into a walk, let's say in the beach, or when I swim in the water, or I walk in the forest, I touch a tree, there is this part of me that I cannot explain, but I know these things are sort of alive. I'm connected to them, and like you write a ton of times in Spellbound, all is one. I know I'm part of it, and it's part of me. But I have to admit, it's not a disappointment or discouragement that because of course modern medicine, and we'll discuss this too, Daniel, is all of the achievements we've accomplished in modernity through materialism are great, but at the same time, I think we've lost that touch with our instincts, with our gut feelings, with our intuition, with the forests. And for example, if I'm walking on the beach and I see a rainbow, I just think, oh, it's a rainbow. It's already classified as science, There's no awe. This feeling of connectedness towards the world is kind of lost. And so why did this happen? Why did we sort of lost faith in, the mythical, magical realm of life, the one that we can really explain yet, at least quantitatively? Yeah.
The unconscious part of the psyche, the instinct, the animal nature that we have, it is incredibly powerful. It's incredibly important. It gives us inspiration, energy, interest, and it makes us feel alive. The other side of the equation, the conscious part, is rational and logical. And it's a little bit, from an emotional standpoint, it's a little bit empty. It's a little bit bare. It's a little bit poor. But on the other hand, it's capable of world domination, right? That's what sets us apart from all the other animals on this planet, is that we have rationality. And I think that rationality, one of the places where rationality flowered was during the Enlightenment, when we discovered the scientific method. which is absolutely about reason and logic. And discovering the scientific method suddenly allowed us to explode in terms of prosperity. If you look at a graph of the average productivity of a human being through the ages, it's just a flat line, barely, avoiding starvation, and then suddenly, boom, it takes off exponentially. And that's because of the scientific method, among other things. Also new political organizations that allow people to have freedom to reach their full potential. But so much of it was about rationality and science. And so naturally, we became enamored with the scientific method, with logic and rationality. And it has absolutely transformed our world, largely from a materialistic perspective. And because we've kind of fallen in love with it, with technology, with computers, with automation, we have overvalued it and lost the other side. So instead of bringing it up into balance with our instinctual side, we've completely suppressed the instinctual side. And there's a price to pay for that. Throughout human history, the supernatural, spiritualism, has been central to every culture. I'm not an anthropologist, but I can't think of any culture that didn't have as its center some form of spirituality. Mm-hmm. That's not true today. Spirituality being irrational has sort of been pushed into the corner as an embarrassment. But I think that the reason why spirituality has been central to cultures through history is because that's part of the way the brain evolved. We need that. Natural selection brought that about. And if you don't feed that to your brain, in some way it's like not feeding healthy food to your body, or not exercising, or maybe even like not getting oxygen, something that our biology demands. And I think that some of the consequences of that is that our unconscious is becoming more and more primitive. And so if you look at the way people interact with one another, rather than having this very sophisticated play of emotions and humor and irony and fun, largely what you see is rage. We've become a rage culture. And so I think that because we have devalued that aspect of it, it's become primitive, and we've lost our sophistication and the value in those aspects of humanity.
Wow, you couldn't have said it better. And of course, being such an expert in mental health and a practitioner, I think you've seen firsthand how at least the losing of this side of our identity of who we are has taken a toll in the way we express ourselves, like you say right now. We also how to understand ourselves, explore ourselves. None of us know why we're here, but that spiritual realm of it all allows us to at least tap into, the transcendence that you speak of in Spellbound. And you also mentioned right now, Daniel, that we're witnessing a reality of a social reality, rather, of rage. And I think this is a perfect way of getting a bit into the Jungian's ideas of, you talk about the unconscious, the personal unconscious, which we discussed a bit here, but the collective unconscious and conscious too. And there was this movie called Waking Life, which is one of my favorite movies. They discuss that, for example, they did an experiment in, I think it was 2 different places across the world. And one person did the math exam before the other person. And a week later, the other person who took the exam had better results. And so what they're trying to say is, we're connected in a web of collective conscious. The answers are there. So if I have an idea for a startup and I haven't really executed it, it's already there. Someone's going to take it. And so, Daniel, my question here for you is the reality of rage that we're witnessing, the anger, the isolation. You've seen it firsthand. I'm certain of it. Is the collective conscious experiencing these, these flare-up, these eruptions that you discuss on in Spellbound of rage, and it's trying to, the unconscious mind, the hive mind of us is trying to just make itself be heard on your perspective?
Yeah, so let's briefly talk about the collective unconscious.
Yes.
Jung argued, I think very reasonably, that just as all human beings share anatomical similarities, we all have 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 nose, 2 lungs, a liver, et cetera, the brain also shares anatomical similarities, and that's reflected in psychological similarities. So one thing that he noticed was that if you look at the mythologies across cultures, there are repeating themes, even in cultures that are widely divided by time and space and did not have any connection between them. Now, there's 2 ways to interpret that. There is a mystical way, and say, well, maybe, on some mystical level, there is this connection. And I think that's a reason. That's one way of looking at it. It's not the way I look at it, because I want to look at it from a scientific point of view. Because in some ways, I feel that the mystical approach is kind of a dead end. Because you're like, okay, it's mystical. Now what? Well, there's nowhere else to go. But with the scientific approach, you can constantly refine it and learn more. So the scientific approach is that this is just simply evolution. The reason why you see themes of the hero, the wise old man, the wise old woman, the transformational journey, why you see these same themes in the stories across cultures is because that's the way our brains developed. And since we're all human beings, we all have human brains. Now, as you say, sometimes things will spread. Well, what's going on there? Are these mystical spiritual strings vibrating? Maybe, but I think there's another way of looking at it, and that is that just as our conscious minds communicate with one another via language, our unconscious minds also have a way of communicating with each other that's going on under the surface. And it could be things, it could be through words, but it could also be through inflections and body language and tone and mood level, all these different things. And if you give an example of that, we've all seen couples who do nothing but fight. And it seems like they absolutely hate one another. And of all the people in the world, their partner is like the worst. And so we ask ourselves, why are these people staying together? What do they possibly have to gain? And what Jung would say is, well, all you're seeing is the conscious relationship. There's also an unconscious relationship that's invisible. They're probably even unaware of it. But whatever it is that they're finding valuable in that relationship that's keeping them there is going on at the unconscious level. And so, I think we see this epidemic of rage spreading, both through words. What that person said made me angry, but there's also nonverbal stuff that we're unaware of, that's pulling us into this feeling of the most effective way to express yourself is through the most primitive reactions of swearing and physical destruction and all these kinds of things. When we ignore the unconscious mind, when we don't try to engage it in a friendly way, it regresses and becomes primitive and destructive.
Absolutely. And one of the ways that I try to untap the unconscious mind and get to know myself more is through the power of dreams. I know you write on it too, and Jung was very fond of the dream world and the archetypes that appear on the dreams, which are very interesting. But I'm interested in learning how, for example, I write my dreams. I have a dream journal, and sometimes I see the themes. But how do you engage, knowing the power of, at least this is a route, a very intriguing route for us to tap into the unconscious mind. And so how do you, Daniel, see the dreams and how do you engage with them?
Yeah. Could I take a step back first?
Yes.
And just talk about what it means to engage with the unconscious mind?
Yes.
So it's really a two-step process. There's separation and reconnection. When we're born in an unconscious state. For a little infant, they're really reacting on an instinctual level. They're not doing a lot of reflection. They're not doing a lot of deliberation. They're not doing a lot of rational consideration. And so at birth, the conscious and the unconscious mind are undifferentiated. Now, what happens as we grow up is that conscious mind separates itself off from the unconscious mind. It makes itself independent, relatively independent of instinct, and also able to think in a rational, logical way. So if you look at kids, if you look at adolescents, we can see that they are so much more driven by their instinctual powers than adults are. And so they behave kind of in animalistic ways that can be annoying for adults, but at the same time, we envy them the joy that they have in being so close to their instincts. So we grow up and we develop this independent conscious mind that's able to use the tools of rationality and resist, to some degree, being overwhelmed by instinct. So once we establish that separation, now it's safe to try to open up the gates and let the unconscious mind contribute with what it has to offer and hopefully not overwhelm us. You know, coming in contact with the unconscious mind can be incredibly enriching, but there's also danger to it because the instinctual part of humanity is so much more powerful than this fragile rationality that we have to be careful. We've got to be careful. And one thing that I strongly recommend is meditation, because meditation strengthens the conscious mind. By learning focus and concentration, it becomes stronger and stronger, and that makes it safer and safer to open up these gates and allow the power of our animal instinctuality to come through. All right, so what about dreams? So when we are asleep, the conscious mind is offline. And so that's an opportunity for the unconscious mind to express itself. And Jung believed it did it through dreams. Dreams, I think, are very, very challenging for a number of reasons. Basically what they are is flipping a switch and allowing the unconscious mind to speak. Now, the problem with that is as I mentioned, the unconscious mind speaks in such an alien way, in a way that's so different that it's incredibly difficult for us to understand what it's saying. Not only that, it's incredibly difficult for us to retain it. Good for you for keeping a dream journal, because I think that what everybody notices is that you can wake up and say, oh my God, I just had the most important dream imaginable. And then boom, oh my God, now I can't remember a single thing, right? It's incompatible with the way the conscious mind thinks. And so a lot of times it's just flushed right out if you don't write it down right away. Another thing is that the unconscious mind communicates in a very different way, symbolically. And so it can be very difficult to understand what it's saying. We can help ourselves out there by simply learning more about the way the unconscious speaks by reading things like myths and fairy tales, literature, exposing ourselves to classical art and Renaissance art, where expression of unconscious symbols was very, very popular. So dreams can be very valuable, but it's challenging to remember them. It's challenging to understand them. And familiarizing yourself with the symbols the unconscious used to communicate is a pretty big project.
Yeah, and one of the symbols I didn't really know the meaning behind it before reading Spellbound was the wedding ring. I didn't really know, before you explained it on Spellbound, I didn't really know what it meant and why was it, used in gold. What does it mean, the infinite, the connection, and also the Ouroboros, one of the symbols that, your cover, the book cover is the Ouroboros. And it's so interesting that while it speaks another language, the unconscious, it speaks to our unconscious. And so do you want to say something or?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I want to say that I used the wedding ring as an example of a piece of magic in our lives. Most people think about magic as something you see in movie theaters or in books, but actually there are magical objects in our lives. So I use the example of the wedding ring. Okay, what is a wedding ring? Well, it's just a circle of gold. It's just gold atoms in a certain shape. It shouldn't mean anything, but it's actually a magical object. When you're wearing your wedding ring versus not, you feel very differently. Your wedding ring is an object of power in that it can help you manage unconscious forces that are not acting in your best interest. So, for example, if you see an attractive person and you're flirting with them, you have the potential to ruin your life if you have an affair with them and destroy perhaps the most important relationship. And having that wedding ring on can help. It can give you power that you might not have without it. One more example, imagine losing your wedding ring. What the emotional reaction to that would be. If I lose my cell phone, I'm going to be upset, but I'll just go to the store and get another one. And it's a financial loss, but I'll get over it. If I lose my wedding ring, oh my God, that's going to be an emotional earthquake, not only for me, but also for my spouse. And so many things in our lives go beyond atoms and molecules. And we don't like to use the word magic because that's not consistent with our post-Enlightenment view. But I think that from a scientific perspective, that's the most accurate, most descriptive word that we can use.
100%. And also when I started thinking about the wedding ring that way, for example, I'm not married yet, but it took another meaning, like a deeper meaning. It's just not, it's not a protocol, right? It's not something we just do. It's a connection into something deeper. And that, I'm extrapolating into the macro, that could also be a great way for us to, at least have a renewed faith in our institutions, because younger generations like myself, Generation Z, millennials are experiencing this loneliness pandemic, disconnection between one another, and we'll discuss that, in your experience as a senior vice president of mental in Hims and Hers. But besides that, we're not getting married anymore. We lost faith in those institutions. And so I think that's those connections that we could do with our life, giving that sense of awe, of magic, are great. But Daniel, as an expert yourself, writing about this can have some sort of backlash. And I know you're trying to connect it in a scientific way, but on your perspective, is the magical an antithesis of the scientifical? And are you experiencing, some backlash from peers or saying that this might be just woohoo and we shouldn't really take into consideration what magic could do for us?
Yeah. The answer is no, because I was very careful in the book. There is no conflict between science and magic if we understand magic from a psychological point of view.
Right.
When I say that a wedding ring is magical, I'm saying it's metaphorically magical. Mm-hmm. It's psychologically magical. It's even practically magical, because you can do magic things with it, good things and bad things. I can put it on and get special powers to perhaps resist the allure of adultery. I can lose it and have the negative magical powers of feeling horrible about what happened. So as long as we view the word magic as a metaphor for psychological activity, there's no problem with it between science. But I think that most people don't know that. They don't know that magic is psychology. They think that magic is irrationality, and so they reject it. And what happens is, the problem with that is that they go through life asking the wrong questions. So, for example, if I can go to your example of Gen Z, Gen Z is not getting married. They're not having children. And they're doing that because they're doing that based on rational answers to the questions they're asking. For example, what's going to be best for my financial condition? Well, getting married and having kids is going to require some sacrifices in terms of your career, and that may ultimately lead to less lifetime salary. They ask themselves, what's going to be best in terms of my ability to reach the goals I've set for myself, whatever that may be, having 10,000 views or making X number of dollars or owning this car or this handbag. And they plot their life out according to those goals, because those are the things that our society is telling them is good. The problem is that that's not going to lead to a happy, satisfying life. As I mentioned earlier, Happiness comes from the feeling of being alive. And you can't buy that in a store. We've all had the experience of perhaps going out with friends and doing something, who knows what. We go, oh my God, that was amazing. It's a shame Joe wasn't with us. Next weekend, we're going to grab Joe. We're going to do the exact same thing. You do it, and it's not the same at all, because it wasn't the thing. It was the activation of the unconscious mind, and we have no control over that. That is a gift. There are things we can do to make it more likely to happen, but we can't control it. And in mythology, that's expressed in the saying, the water of life is never found in the same place twice. So, I think that when people are pursuing what they call self-expression or material success, they're pursuing things that ultimately are not going to make them happy and are not going to satisfy their need for meaning, because they're ignoring these parts of their brain that are evolutionarily determined. You can't get away from them. You can't say, hey, listen, I'm a 21st century person. All of that old stuff doesn't apply to me. Hey, you know what? The reason that old stuff is stuck around for thousands and thousands of years is because it resonates so powerfully with the way evolution has brought about the modern human brain. We just can't throw that stuff away. We need it.
Wow, and one of the things that at least my generation is also throwing away, in a sense, trying to pursue the material gains like you discussed right now, and the wealth, whatnot, the self-recognition, the recognition across, is religion. Religion is also taking really a toll in our generation. No one's really, many people are not describing themselves as religious anymore, but that's also, on your perspective, that's also a way of connecting, with that millions of years of code and evolutionary code that we have.
That's right. Religion contains a lot of important psychological truths, just as many as the field of psychology. And it's irrational, and it doesn't get you, new cars or new computers or new cell phones. And so I think it's been sort of thrown away as being worthless. But the brain needs religion the way the body needs food. It's simply a product of evolution. And so what happens is that if you throw away the old religions, religions that are very sophisticated because they have grown and developed over thousands of years, it needs to be replaced with something. And what it's being replaced with are things like tribalism and partisanship and rage and anger. And let me give you an example. Half the country looks at the presidential candidate of the other half and says, it is inconceivable that somebody could support that person for president. Not unwise, not imprudent, not foolish, inconceivable. And so our minds, our approaches have become so, I don't know if emotion-based is the right word, but irrational in their own way, that people that we share a land with, a country with, people that we have so much in common with, we can't conceive their brain set when it comes to politics. And what that tells me is that we have left the realm of rational discussion and entered the realm of religion. Politics has become the new religion, and it's a horrible religion. But that's what we're stuck with because we threw away the old religions.
Wow, and like you say, these institutions, to put it that way, have not only allowed us to, survive, but part of that survival is because, evolutionarily speaking, it made us connect with a tribe. It made us connect with more people. We were part of something big, and like you say, that cannot be replaced. That cannot be ended. That just it's replaced. It just has another name, And right now we're experiencing a wave of it all, just to put it that way, of politics, that it's being more destructive than constructive in a way, because we cannot reconcile the differences in politics, and it becomes very, very toxic.
Yeah, I've spoken a number of times about how the unconscious is the animal side of our nature. And the animal side can be so powerful, animal energy, animal spirits, but it's also wild, and it can be absolutely destructive. We've seen people's instinctual drives destroy their lives through very unwise sexual behaviors or financial decisions, et cetera, et cetera. And what our job is to tame these things, almost like a horse trainer tames a horse and turns a wild animal into a helper and a companion. And one of the things that religions grew up to do was to give us this environment in which we could tame those wild instincts and turn them into helpers and friends. And we don't have that anymore. And as a result, our instincts run wild. We see problems with addiction, sex addiction. Porn is just absolutely overwhelming the young men of this country. And it's because it's one of those wild instincts that we have completely lost control over.
Yeah, and I was just speaking about this with my brother yesterday. He's also a therapist. We were discussing your ideas too. Is that I'm witnessing, at least in my generation, a ton of premiums into what you're saying, into this, trying to unleash the animal side of it all. And what's really interesting for me is, I told him that this is not a law of gravity. This is not part of the nature. This is just cultural. We're living in this aspect of culture, of this, I was born in this time and age, but that doesn't mean that everyone has to be, vanity driven or lonely. This is just part of the context that we're in. And so that's really interesting. And go ahead.
If I could just say, I think that part of this is driven by a certain confusion. We've built these machines that do our physical labor for us. And so we don't have to do, most of us don't have to do nearly as much physical labor as our ancestors did. And now we're getting cognitive machines, computers, and we have made the mistake of thinking that they can do our cognitive labor for us.
Wow.
But they can't. A machine can bring me a truckload of grain from the farm, but it can't do the moral work of learning how to control my sexual drives, my appetitive drives for donuts and food like that, my desire to take the easy way out and tell a lie instead of telling the truth. Machines can't take that labor away from us, but we've lost that. And so we kind of slid into this idea of, well, we don't have to do physical labor because of machines. We have to do cognitive labor either. All we have to do is sit back and demand to be entertained.
Wow, that's in. I was going to speak about AI a bit later, but I think it's a perfect way of discussing that, because I'm very interested in artificial intelligence. I'm very interested, and I know you are as well. I'd like to discuss, your perspective on how we can unleash the potential of mental health and mental health therapy across the nation and across the world. But on my perspective, like you say, we've transitioned from a manual work industry to one that is cognitive, one that's built on the mind. But at the same time, we're now in that inflection point where AI can take care of that as well. And so if you can extrapolate into the future, how we're going to use our time, most of us, like you say, we're going to use it to entertain ourselves into death. You also write about dopamine in your previous book. We haven't really understood what dopamine is and how addiction gets literally unfolded in our lives. I've also hosted Anna Lemke. We discussed that a ton in a previous conversation. But now that we're going to have that free time, arguably one of the freest times we're going to have in history, or in a long time, because, who am I to say in history? But how will AI unleash that realm of life that, you know, we're going to have time to think, time to express ourselves, arguably on one hand, you know, time to get into that transcendence, creative work, unleash the creative work of you know, the unconscious, but at the same time, maybe we'll go crazy. You know, what are we going to do if we have so much time exploring ourselves, or, you know, not being busy, not being, trying to not get distracted? So if I'm making sense, Daniel, my question is, how do you see AI playing into these equations that we're discussing?
Yeah, I'm very, very excited about AI. And at Hims and Hers, we're doing some very exciting work trying to implement it to help people with their mental health. But it's a powerful tool, and powerful tools can be very helpful or very destructive. And for example, if you look at the case of opioids, you know, if you've ever had surgery or been in some traumatic accident, you can say with me, thank God for opioids. But opioids can also absolutely destroy your life. And that's how it is with any tool. Mm-hmm. It can be incredibly helpful and productive, and it can also destroy things. And AI is no exception. We can talk in a minute about how we're using AI to try to promote mental health. We'll talk about the dangers first, though. And that is that we may, just as we've sort of turned over a lot of our physical labor to machines, we may turn over a lot of our mental and emotional labor, sort of regress into going back to being children and allowing AIs to take care of us. And, you know, oh, you need to be at this doctor's appointment. Oh, you need to be at this play date. You know, just, we don't have any responsibilities. We're just doing what our AI assistant is telling us to do. The problem with that is, you know, if you want to build muscles, you know that you need resistance. Mm-hmm. You need to push against something in order for your muscles to grow. It's the same with the psyche. In order to have psychological, personal growth, you have to have obstacles to overcome. So this idea of, okay, AI is going to give me so much free time, I can use that for personal development to grow. No. You have it exactly backwards. Growth comes not from having free time to address your needs. Growth comes from challenges that almost take you down. And so people who have terrible losses are sometimes crushed by those losses and never recover. But if they're not crushed, they're made stronger. People who battle cancer often talk about how it led them to completely change their lives, to appreciate the people that they love, to appreciate small things like rainbows and sunsets. People who, any kind of challenge that threatens your competency is how you grow. So I am a little bit worried that by making our lives much, much easier, the risk is it could infantilize us. And we need to be very, very careful about this idea that personal growth comes from having free time to pursue our own interests. It doesn't. Personal growth comes from overcoming challenges. And I think also I'd just like to bring in here something called the happiness paradox. Mm-hmm. The happiness paradox is a very, very well-established psychological principle that says if you go out and do things to seek your own happiness, it won't make you happy. But if you work for the happiness of other people, that will make you happy.
Yeah, I think that what I was trying to say is that, you know, we're seeing, like in what you said right now, Daniel, is that arguably AI will take care of everything, and we're going to lose our sense of agency in a way. We're going to lose what makes us human. And I'm concerned that, like you say, I share that concern with you, is that now we're going to not be so busy in work, in the definition that we have of work. We're going to transition into freedom, quote unquote, and we're not prepared to embrace that freedom because we're packed with distractions. We cannot be bored. We have to, you know, it's a cue. When I'm bored, I'm going to turn on my phone. and I'm going to scroll through social media. We can't contemplate or go into forestries anymore as much as we did. We cannot connect with that unconscious realm we discussed earlier, Daniel. And I'm concerned that in a way it's an opportunity to discover ourselves. And also what you said, the last thing you said is the happiness paradox. We're going to be able to reconnect with what makes us human, is our communities, is us sharing this blue marble in the universe. We're in this spaceship together, and the best way of doing it is helping each other. But I'm concerned that AI is going to replace that. We won't be able to see that hidden opportunity, that hidden gem that is freedom. And that reminds me of Nathaniel Branden's ideas of, being a hero, almost being a virtuous person. Choosing morality in today's world can be deemed as a superpower. You can be seen as a superhero. And so how do you see, or rather, how do you think that we could untap that potential that we all have, that we all believe we have and we know we have, with AI, with these new technologies, and reconnect with the unconscious in a good way, in a healthy way, with the shadow itself?
Yeah. So, we evolved in an environment in which we hunted for survival, and when we had conflict, it was hand-to-hand conflict. Not pulling triggers, but whacking people over the head with stones. And it doesn't sound very appealing, but it actually is very important. Physical activity is part of the unconscious, your body, part of your unconscious. And we need that. And so what did we do when we no longer went hunting and smashed people over the head with rocks? We developed sport, right? Mm-hmm. And so sports are a kind of hunting. We hunt for the ball. They're a kind of physical aggression. And we really, really enjoy that. And for some people, playing sports is the highlight of their life. And my son is like that, and I totally get it. and I think we're going to need to do something similar with the psychological aspects. Just like machines and farming took away our need for a lot of physical labor that our humanity evolved to engage in, and we replaced it with sports and other things. We're going to need, AI is brand new. It may take us 100 years to figure it out. What's going to replace the very, very healthy adversity that we face these days? Sports is kind of an artificial adversity. You create this goal that's very difficult to achieve, and it's no fun if it's easy. We're going to need to create artificial adversity, in order to exercise the parts of our brain that we've turned over to AI. I have no idea what that's going to look like, but it's probably going to be kind of cool.
I can't wait for that to happen. And it's so funny that you mentioned sports, because I've always thought that it's an evolutionary compensation of our lack of our thankfully, I should say, lack of violence that we have between each other. But Daniel, getting into, trying to wrap up the conversation in a uplifting way, or, trying to see the possibilities that we're discussing now of AI and this whole intersection that is so interesting with what you write in Spellbound, and clarifying that it's not magic in a woohoo way, but all in a scientific way, which gives it so much more strength. And this connection with therapy, with mental health, that it's no longer stigmatized, and your role as Senior Vice President of Mental in Hims and Hers. How do you see AI and psychology unleashing that part of our nature, and some of the technical ways, practical ways that you're seeing AI uncover that side of us and treating the mental health, I would say, pandemic that we're witnessing in the nation?
I look around and I see this unbalance between the conscious and the unconscious. And so I wrote a book really emphasizing the importance of the unconscious aspect. That said, I love technology. I've been a geek my entire life, and I just find it so much fun. So, yeah, I tear it down because I think there's an imbalance. I also love it. So I'm so excited about AI. I've been taking a Stanford online course to really understand the mathematics behind it, the logistic regressions, the neural networks. And it's got amazing potential. And the way we're using it at Hims and Hers is we're using it to try to help providers do a better job of choosing the right medication for depression and anxiety. It's harder than you think. You know, the most commonly used medications are SSRIs, serotonin-specific reuptake inhibitors. These are terrific medications, but it's very difficult to know which one is going to be right for which person. You can't do a brain scan or a blood test. It's almost a guessing game. And a very large study funded by the NIH found that only about 30% of patients with depression recover with the first medication that they try. Now, they can try more and that number will go up, but sometimes people give up if the first one doesn't work. And so we really, really want to get that number above 30%. So what we're doing is with AI, we're looking at all kinds of different patient characteristics. You know, we've been fortunate enough to have thousands and thousands of episodes of patient treatment. So we've got the big data that AI needs in order to make inferences. So we're looking at symptoms, we're looking at past history, we're looking at family history, we're looking at everything we can. And the beautiful thing about an AI is we don't have to say, we think this is important, we think that is important. We can feed this massive corpus of data, far more than any human being would ever be able to digest, and the AI can process it, ideally find patterns, and we're optimistic that we're going to be able to bring that number up. It's not going to replace the clinician. It's going to sort of be an assistant. It's going to say, hey, based on these factors, I'm thinking this medication, but of course the clinician's going to need to look at the whole chart and use their judgment.
Yes, that was my follow-up question, is that, you know, I'm very interested in, like we've discussed throughout the conversation and my connections reading your book in Spellbound is, I keep thinking on what if AI replaces therapists, which now you stated that it won't, thankfully, because I think that AI will never, I don't know, we'll see. This is just me speaking out loud. I don't think it will never be able to access the realm of the unconscious, you know, the one that we've discussed throughout the entire conversation. And when I go to therapy, or when I think about therapy, and I've also read about, you know, the research done that how do people feel when discussing with a therapist that is an AI, how much do they share, how much do they feel like they've been heard, what was the efficiency of the conversation versus a human one, is that we also, in a way, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not the expert here, but part of going to therapy is also trying to connect with someone, no? Try to feel heard. And do you think that in a future where companies offer you a space to discuss your own ideas with an AI will be fruitful or not? Because just a small follow-up would be, we're seeing a lot of dating in the technology, the AI companions. So people are having their date life being literally externalized to an AI. And so that's where I think this connection lies.
Yeah, it's an extremely difficult question. So AIs cannot replace psychiatrists or therapists today. I am not at all confident I'll be able to say the same thing in 10 or 20 years. But even if they do replace them, they will not be the same, as you pointed out. You know, what is the goal of a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist? Well, their primary goal is to treat illness, to make symptoms get better and restore a patient to their previous level of functioning. I believe it's entirely possible an AI will be able to do that as well as a human being. But another thing that therapists help their patients with is with personal growth. And that one I'm not so sure about. You know, as we spoke earlier, there's two levels of communication between people. There's the conscious level, the words, and to some degree the facial expressions and the hand expressions. But then there's the unconscious. And I believe that the unconscious pipe is much thicker than the conscious pipe. There's a lot more data going on between us unconsciously than there is consciously. And you're right, the AI is not going to have that. And I think that that's even more of an issue in these personal relationships you mentioned, the AI girlfriend. Mm-hmm. The AI girlfriend is going to be able to say all the right things. You're so great. You're so handsome. I love you so much. You're perfect. You're wonderful. You don't need to change. And some guys are going to like that. But there's so much more to a relationship than flattery. And the AI is simply not going to have the unconscious because we don't even know what that is. The unconscious is hidden from everybody. We can't program that into an AI. And so my hope is that after perhaps an initial fad, it's so much fun to have a girlfriend who always says the right thing, people will say, oh my God, I'm so bored, I need a human being.
Me too, honestly, because it also hints into our lack of, like you discussed and you said perfectly in this conversation, our lack of trying to build that muscle, that social muscle as well. It's just trying to choose the least path of resistance, and it also speaks about the concerns that I've shared with you and you've expressed here, that these compensations, evolutionary compensations of rage, and not all us being able to connect and be vulnerable between one another, and which is dating, which is a relationship, is sharing ourselves with other people. And so I'm hopeful that we will be able to turn that around. It won't become just mainstream. It will be a fad, and that's it, like you say, Daniel. And, this was, I know I can speak with you for the whole day. I'm hopeful that we can have another episode with you. I would love to host you again. Many things that I have more than 3 pages of questions here, Daniel. But the last question I think that we could end up with, and unless you want to add something up, is that I keep thinking of your last chapter on Spellbound, which is trying to uncover the self-transcendence equation of it all. And what would be a practical step for our audience, for me, which you mentioned meditation, but, on a deeper scale, for us to reach self-transcendence, to try to connect with that unknown nature that is the unconscious mind?
Self-transcendence is defined as going beyond your concern about your own needs and looking outwards to the needs of others. This happens to sages and monks. It also happens to some ordinary people as they age. I can't remember the exact number, but I think about a third of us will naturally become more transcendent as we age. And we've all seen these people, grandparents who just love seeing their grandkids get happy, and they don't need anything for themselves. They just want to see the smile on the grandkid's face. Maybe some of us have had mentors who have generously given their time to us. Maybe these are incredibly accomplished people that people are throwing money at. Give me an hour of your time. I'll pay you X dollars. And they say, no, I'm going to give it to free to this young person because I want to lift them up. So that's the focus of successful aging, is bringing about that transcendence, and it leads to an enormous amount of joy. We are a youth-obsessed culture, but the truth of the matter is, barring some rough times midlife, we tend to get happier the older we are. And a wrinkled, shriveled 70-year-old prune is probably a lot happier than a sexy 20-year-old hard body. And as a culture, we don't pay attention to that. So what can we do to promote this connection with our unconscious mind, ideally leading to the state of transcendence? I would say that the first step is to simply pay attention to what makes you happy. You may be surprised. So you choose to do an activity, pay attention, whether it makes you happy or not. You're helping somebody out, maybe, I don't know, doing something you really didn't want to do that day. Pay attention. Maybe it's making you happy. and it will help you to get a better sense of who you are, what makes you happy, and where you want to go in life.
Absolutely, and it'll allow us to at least pay it forward to our collective. And, in Japan, I remember that I read that they fight, the siblings fight to choose who's going to take care of the elderly. And like you say, our culture is the opposite. Let's just, push it away. But I appreciate you stating, how important it is to age and listen to our elderly. They're the wisest. They've been much more alive in this earth, this blue marble, than me. So I'm trying to heed their advice, and I hope their audience also, encourages that. And Daniel, thank you so much for joining me. I hope to host you again. I will leave all of your information in the notes so people can reach out and buy your books and keep connecting with you. So I appreciate you joining me. Thank you.
Thanks, Al. It's been great to be here. Our unconscious is becoming more and more primitive. And so if you look at the way people interact with one another, rather than having this very sophisticated play of emotions and humor and irony and fun, largely what you see is rage. We've become a rage culture. And so I think that because we have devalued that aspect of it, it's become primitive, and we've lost our sophistication and the value in those aspects of humanity.